Hi, I'm Andrew Shoblin. I'm Trackside Engineering Director here at Mercedes, and I'm going to be answering your questions from the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. Okay, so really exciting weekend here. We didn't know what to expect going into it on Sunday morning. We knew that Red Bull would be strong, Ferrari would be strong, but we had an incident-filled race right from the word go. Kimi crashing, taking that soft tyre. You saw the warm-up completely dominating the race. Red Bull not able to get their tyres started. We had a few issues of our own. We had safety cars bringing everyone together. Just when we thought we got it all sorted out, Valtteri, looking like he was in a very commanding position for the win, hit that debris that hadn't been cleared up off the track, took him out of contention, but luckily we had Lewis there, P2, to take over. Real shame for Valtteri, driven brilliantly all weekend, super composed race, but nice to get our first win of the season. So thank you to Richard on Facebook, your question about whether the tyres are actually the real divas here. Well, it has been tricky, especially the last couple of races. So in China we had extremely cold conditions. It was 14 degrees ambient in qualifying, the track was only 16. Baku was a little bit warmer in the race, 16 ambient, the track was sitting in the mid-20s. But the problem in Baku is there's no fast corners, and fast corners give you a lot of energy. So that's why we've had these problems in the last couple of races. There's also an element at the start of the year, the teams are really understanding where they need to get the tyres in terms of temperature and how they need to run their cars. But you're right, it was completely dominated by warm-up, by temperature. The drivers were doing everything they could to get them started, and you saw a lot of teams were taking 15, even 20 laps to get the best out of the tyres. So next question, Freddie on Twitter, about how we can actually affect the tyre temperatures with the design of the car. Well, the biggest one is actually the speed of the car. If you've got a fast car, it generates a lot more tyre temperature just because of the energy that's going into them on those corners. So that's number one. But the other thing you'll see is teams using the cake tins at the front of the car. They've got cutaways, some of them have got louvered elements, and that lets the really hot air from the brakes. So these brake discs are running at 600, even 800 degrees centigrade, and that hot air can come and it sits between the drum and the rim, and it's heating the tyre, and they can use those to get it started. You'll also see the drivers doing a lot of weaving. Again, it's the cornering content that generates the energy to generate the temperature, and they're trying to bring them in. So there's a number of different factors that we can play with on the car, just trying to drive them up. But in Baku, everyone was really in the same boat. You saw Ferrari with good warm-up, but even they were still struggling to get the tyres up to the absolute perfect temperature. Okay, and now we've got a question from Matt on Instagram about the relative performance of the ultra soft and the super soft tyre and why some teams were choosing to start on the super. Well, what we'd seen on Friday was the ultra was actually quite a weak tyre at Baku. I think that was a surprise for a number of teams, but we were seeing some abrasion on the fronts where it just starts to tear and open up and you lose grip. You also saw some teams that had a bit of damage on the rear, but the net effect of that was that through the stint you were losing a bit of grip. Now, those teams that were fast enough to get through Q2 on the Super chose to take it. You saw that with Ferrari, with Red Bull, with us. Kimi had the issue, he'd locked up and he'd scrapped that set, so he actually had to start on the Ultra. But the concern with the Ultra was the degradation would bring you in early and you would lose control of the race. So that was why the front were choosing to start on the Super. And at the time, I think most people were thinking it would be super soft, straight onto the soft tyre, run the whole race on that. What emerged on Sunday, though, was the warm-up issues, which was why you saw more people jumping back to the Ultra, just thinking if they can manage it, if they can look after it, it will be okay, but at least it'll have better warm-up. Now we've got a question from Nicolette on Twitter about the gap that Valtteri let develop between him and Lewis. Was it deliberate? Well, no, it wasn't really. They were both struggling with the warm-up, perhaps Valtteri a bit more than Lewis in those early stages. And it's difficult because when you haven't got the grip, you're on a street circuit, the walls are super close, and you don't know how hard you can push the car without making a mistake. You saw people when they did make mistakes, it normally puts them out of the race. So Valtteri was just feeling the grip, bringing the tyres in. He had dropped a bit, but then you saw he started to push harder. He found that the grip came up, and he was able to do very good lap times and sit with Lewis. but it was difficult for him to close that gap down even when his tyres were warm, because Lewis's were working well and Lewis was going in a good position. Now, the next bit of the question was, were we, without the lockup, were we going to leave Lewis out and go on the Ultra at the end? Well, we'd certainly started talking about that. We'd expected Red Bull to do the same. They were struggling on the Super. We didn't think that they were going to want to go to the soft. So we were leaving it as an option, but there was nothing really driving us to make a decision at that point. It was only when Lewis locked up that we had to come and take the soft, because the Ultra was never going to get to the end. And now we've got a question from Ryan on Instagram about whether we were hoping for that safety car. Well, absolutely. That was what we were hoping for. It's Baku, and actually there's a pretty good chance of getting a safety car. So when Sebastian came in, he leaves this window whereby he's sufficiently far behind us that if we stop under a safety car or a VSC and you get the shorter pit loss, we could actually take the lead of the race. Now they're hoping that there isn't one, but it's one of those strategies that you play for, and it's actually quite difficult to lead the race and control it, because you are protecting against people undercutting you, but also this issue with the safety car, and you can't do both. So that's where it does create opportunities for whoever's in P2. Nate from Instagram. Well, if there hadn't been a safety car, we would have come in with Valtteri, we would have taken the Ultra Soft about 10 laps from the end of the race, because the Super wasn't degrading, it was going really well, and we could have run it as long as we liked. And those 10 laps would have given him just enough time to catch up with Seb and battle him for the win. And he would have done that with a couple of laps remaining. With Lewis, we had less options. The default would have just been to run to the finish on the soft, saving position. The soft would have lasted as well. It wasn't really getting any worse, but it wouldn't have had the same grip as the Ultra. Stuart on Instagram, well, the answer to that is no. We didn't give him warning because we didn't see it. The first time we saw it was just as he came over those bumps. That was why he was also blindsighted. You could see him heading towards it, but there was about half a second or a second or so, and it's not enough time for us to get on the radio and tell him that there's debris on the track. If we had seen it, we would have warned him, as we were doing on a lot of the other laps with the other accidents. We were trying to guide them as to the best bit of track to avoid it. But unfortunately on this occasion, it was all too late. So Justin on Twitter, the reality is there's not a lot of information you can take from Baku into Barcelona in terms of how the tyres were behaving. Now, we've got good information from winter testing in Barcelona. Going there for the race though, it's going to be a lot hotter, so you'll be dealing with different conditions, but the reality is that the Baku circuit and the Barcelona are almost opposite ends of the spectrum, so it's quite hard to use the learning from one and apply it to the other. Thanks everybody for all your questions this week. We're now busy getting ready for Barcelona. Hopefully we'll have another great race there, hopefully more Mercedes success, and we'll speak to you after that Grand Prix.